I got the sneakiest plays for the Week 2 DFS slate. These are the under-the-radar guys who can help you win a tournament, whether you're building GPP teams on DraftKings or drafting Battle Royale squads on Underdog. I got 5 sleepers for you today, 1 at each position, and then because I'm feeling generous, a bonus pick. After we share those, we'll lay out 3 strategic angles for attacking Underdog drafts this week, and then we'll hop into a few Battle Royale contests to test these ideas out, see how they work. All right, let's start off where we always do, with the quarterback. We are going with, envelope please, San Francisco quarterback Brock Purdy. He's at Minnesota this week. He has an ADP of 35.4, which makes him the QB9 on Underdog, and his DraftKings salary is $6,100. There is so much uncertainty with the Niners right now. As I record this, we still don't know whether CMC is going to play or not. We're actually going to touch on that in a little bit because there's an interesting strategic wrinkle with CMC status that you need to know if you are drafting in these Battle Royale contests. But let's start here with Purdy. Because as we've established, only 6 quarterbacks get drafted each week, and this positional rank here at QB9 means he's getting drafted in less than 20% of the contest. On the flip side, there's 5 Niners getting drafted in the majority of drafts. You got Deebo Samuel, you got Jordan Mason and Christian McCaffrey, you got George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk, but their quarterback is largely going undrafted. This seems weird to me when you consider the Niners have the 4th highest team total on the slate. They're projected to score 26 points. So how do you actually execute this in drafts? My thought is most drafters are going to select these Niners as just one-off pieces. They're just going to take Kittle on his own, Deebo on his own, etc. So that means there's a nice edge to skinny stacking Purdy with one of those big 3, Deebo, Kittle, or Ayuk. And I think no matter how the CMC situation, works out, he has been practicing, by the way. Again, I don't want to, ruin the evergreen nature of this video by speculating whether he's going to play or not play, because I think you can win both ways. If CMC is active and both him and Mason split work and cap each other's upside, one of the pass catchers could end up as the guy you need, while CMC and Mason essentially cannibalize each other's ceiling. Or if CMC doesn't play again, that opens up more targets for the big 3 because Jordan Mason isn't going to command as many targets as CMC. I also do want to mention, if you're not buying the Brock Purdy here, I think Dak Prescott deserves an honorable mention. I think you stack him up a good chunk of the time with your CeeDee Lamb teams. He, again, isn't getting drafted and could easily pair up with CeeDee Lamb for a tournament-winning score. All right, let's head over to running back. Can't believe I'm doing this name because I didn't draft him hardly at all during best ball drafting season, and that's Jerome Ford, Cleveland running back. He's at Jacksonville this week. He has an ADP of 35.7, which makes him the RB17, and he has a very nice salary on DraftKings as well at $5,900. I knew Ford would be a big part of the offense in week 1, but I still didn't anticipate the workload being as good as it was. Fantasy Life has a new utilization score metric, and Ford posted a top 4 UR score of the week at 9.2. That's next to names like Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall, and he delivered 18.9 fantasy points on a 73% snap share. He also dominated rushing attempts, 86% of them, and took the lone attempt inside the 5-yard line. This is particularly notable because he did not have the goal line role last year, and he also had 7 targets and now faces a Jags defense who gave up a ton of receiving production to the running backs last week. So yeah, I was wrong. This is a new Jerome Ford in this offense if this keeps up, and at these prices, it's hard to miss. Ford is the classic one-off piece that you take at the final pick in your draft. I don't think you have to correlate him with anything, although we do have a pick for you that's in the or on the opposite side of the Browns in this game. But Ford, you just tack him on. If you went chalky with your first 4 or 5 picks, Ford is the perfect guy to help differentiate you and also just give you a lot of projectable volume. And I am leaning, I think, to 2 running back builds this week as opposed to 1 running back and 3 wide receivers, because I think as the season progresses, we're not going to be able to scroll down to plays as good as Jerome Ford, guys who project so well. So I think we take advantage of it while we still can, and then we can adapt as the season progresses. All right, on to wide receiver, and there's a theme here. We are going to talk about another guy I was not selecting hardly at all during best ball season, and this is the beauty of the Battle Royales. We can now, actually draft these guys when they aren't ridiculously priced. I am, of course, talking about wide receiver on the Colts, Michael Pittman Jr. They are playing Green Bay this week. He has an ADP of 35.7. It makes him the wide receiver 24, and his salary is $5,900 on DraftKings. Now, this is a classic Battle Royale gem play here. The Colts exploded last week for 27 points. Their quarterback finished as the QB3 on the slate. Their wide receiver one, Michael Pittman, had a 33% targets per route run and 39% of the team targets, and no one wants to draft him this week. And look, I get it. I watched the game too. The points came from Richardson rushing and throwing deep shots to Alec Pierce and A.D. Mitchell, but I'm not prepared to write off this kind of role after 1 week. We're getting a number one wide receiver here at a major discount. Now, how to execute this? I think there's two ways you can use Pittman. I think you can just take him as a one-off wide receiver in the last round. Say a lot of your picks were at ADP, nothing super creative or unique. You grab Pittman, he's not going to be drafted a lot. That's one way. But I also love him as a stacking partner with Richardson. Richardson is largely going to be used as a naked quarterback with no one else. And I get it. That's what hit last week with Anthony Richardson. So I think pairing him with Pittman, almost like pairing Purdy with one of his stacking partners, is going to be underutilized by the field. And again, I do think it's completely viable to not stack guys like Anthony Richardson, like Jayden Daniels, like Josh Allen. That's exactly what paid off last week. But I think it's going to ultimately be rare to get a wide receiver one with an elite quarterback at this low of ownership. So I do want to take advantage of that while I can this week. All right, now we're going to move on to tight end, and we have a guy actually going against Jerome Ford. I'm talking about Jags tight end Evan Engram. He has an ADP of 35.9. That makes him the tight end 12 this week on Underdog. His salary on DraftKings is also very palatable at $3,500. And look, we're going to talk about Evan Engram, but we also need to talk about the entire elite tight end landscape, because basically every tight end flopped last week. So we're getting some pretty big discounts on Underdog. Sam Laporta, ADP of 18.5, Travis Kelce, ADP of 20.2, McBride, 20.8, Mark Andrews, 33, and George Kittle, 28.9. My favorite, though, is Evan Engram at 35.2, because his positional rank of tight end 8 indicates that he's getting drafted in less than 20% of these drafts. And yes, it wasn't an awesome week one for him, but he still had a 21% targets per route run. That's the same as Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk, which means the duds will be there, but I also think the spikes are coming. This kind of setup with the Jags offense feels similar to me as the Niners, where it's one of them goes off for a big game each week, and you never know which one it's going to be, but the likelihood that it's any one of them is fairly equal. So when I look around at what Brian Thomas and Christian Kirk did, those guys also aren't getting drafted a ton, but Evan Engram can obviously go off for a big game. He had a 2-touchdown game in preseason when Christian Kirk was out. So we know the ceiling's there for Evan Engram. I think he can match the ceiling of these other elite tight ends, but the big difference with him this week is that he isn't regularly getting drafted, and we know how important that is to help us separate with the field. So plug your nose, put Evan Engram in at the very end of your drafts. You can do him as a one-off low-owned gem. You can do a little mini correlation with Jerome Ford if you like, and I also think you can stack him up with Trevor Lawrence. Trevor Lawrence is also going undrafted, but in general, I want to have a ton of these elite tight ends this week. The other guy to mention alongside Engram is Mark Andrews because of that ownership discount. He is also going overlooked in a lot of drafts because people are chasing likely. They're chasing these other guys. So Engram and Andrews, those are my two gems there. All right, for our bonus selection, we're going with another running back here. We did a running back as our bonus last week, and I do think this fits in with what I want to be doing in these early drafts. We kind of mentioned it when we were talking about Jerome Ford, but the touches and projectable volume you can get at the end of these drafts with guys who aren't regularly being selected is just too tough to pass up on right now. And I do think the pendulum will ultimately swing back to having some weeks where going 3 wide receivers, scrolling down for these wide receivers will make sense. But I just can't pass up on a guy like our bonus pick today, New England running back Rhamondre Stevenson. He's playing Seattle at home this week. He has a very nice ADP of 34.8, which makes him the running back 22. And his DraftKings salary is very nice as well at $6,200. We mentioned Jerome Ford's insane utilization score behind Oli Bijan. Well, Rhamondre hit 21.6 points versus the Bengals last week, which led to a top 3 overall utilization score of 9.2. Stevenson had an 80% snap share and accounted for 71% of the team's rush share and posted an elite 72% route participation. It is worth noting Antonio Gibson entered the game with a hip injury, which might have been a factor for why Rhamondre saw so much work, but I do think that I want to mess around and find out basically at these prices. Rhamondre could just be the bell cow. We've never seen a team want to rely on Antonio Gibson in a big role, so I'm willing to go back and see if what we saw from last week is pretty sticky. And how you execute this, very similar to Jerome Ford. You can use Rhamondre as a one-off gem at the end of your drafts. I don't really want to correlate much with this game, and I just want to play it as if the production all funnels through Rhamondre. All right, every week I'm gonna put all of these hidden gems into a single pick'em entry on Underdog Fantasy, and if you wanna tail me, you can. I'll post the link to the pick'em in the description and in the comments, and then you can get the same entry with a single click, and we can all root for the same thing. This is kind of a fun way to just see if we can get all of our picks moving together in the right direction, and maybe there are times when we're sort of right on these guys hitting, but they don't put up a tournament winning score. Well, in that case, we can still benefit from nailing their pick'em entry. So here's what we got for today. I mentioned Jerome Ford, obviously. We're gonna take his receiving yards. I'm taking it at higher than 17.5. He cleared this number easily last week. And with all those targets, I like the idea of him getting a decent amount of checkdowns in this game, especially if they're trailing versus Jacksonville. Next up, we're going with Michael Pittman Jr., 5.5 receptions. This is actually, we're getting a little bit of a scorcher bonus, a premium here on him going higher. I just think if the pendulum swings back to him getting fed underneath, he still had a massive amount of targets last week. I think he could easily eclipse this 5.5 receptions. For Brock Purdy, we're not getting fancy. We're just taking the yards, passing yards higher than 237.5. For Evan Engram, we are going to take 41.5 receiving yards, the higher there. He would not have cleared that last week, but I think he can get there this week versus the Browns. And then lastly, we're doing Rhamondre Stevenson's rush yards here, 62.5. He had well over 100 last week, so I think this one is actually one of my favorites on the board, Rhamondre Stevenson. And I should also mention, you guys have probably heard it before, but if you're new to Underdog, they're now offering up to a $1,000 deposit match when you use promo code Pete. So take advantage of that if you haven't signed up before. They'll also give you a free pick'em special as well. The lobby has been packed full of those right now. Make sure if you guys haven't used it yet, there is a CeeDee Lamb 0.5 yards receiving special. You could tack that on to this entry. It's basically a free pick to add to your entry. They also have one that's a 30% boost as well. So lots of good stuff in the pick'em lobby. Make sure you guys are checking that out. All right, I want to each week use this space to hit on one piece of evergreen battle royale strategy for people who are new to playing. Last week, we gave our 5 battle royale commandment tips. You guys can watch that video and go back in the timestamps if you missed it last week. That's a really good primer to get you caught up to speed. But this week, we're gonna use the CMC injury saga as an opportunity to discuss the swap dynamics with injured players. So I'm gonna explain. Trust me, it might seem like vaguely complicated, but it really isn't, and we can use CMC as a prime example. So CMC obviously goes in the top few picks whenever he's fully healthy, right? 101, 102, maybe 103 if people don't like the matchup, whatever. But he's legit questionable this week. He was a late scratch on the Monday Night Football game. They're now saying he has this Achilles tendonitis. He's also practicing. There's just a lot of uncertainty, which means he has a much lower ADP than usual. At the time of this recording, it's 26.8. And there's a reason for this, right? People are scared that CMC isn't going to play, which is reasonable. I do think there's a good chance he doesn't play. But in these Battle Royale contests, it doesn't really matter if he doesn't play because of the way the injury swaps work. Let me explain, and this comes directly from Underdog's rules. If you select a player like CMC that is later marked as inactive after they are drafted, but before the contest begins. So let's say you draft him today. I'm recording this for a Friday, and then he's ruled out on Saturday. All right. Underdog will automatically swap in the next highest projected player at that position. So you'll get another running back that wasn't drafted in that 6-person draft, just automatically placed into your lineup. Or If you have rankings set, they will select from the top of your custom rankings as opposed to projections. So another scenario would be, say Jordan Mason didn't get drafted. He's obviously getting drafted, but say you had him as your top ranked player who didn't get drafted, you would just get Jordan Mason on that team if CMC didn't play. So this means the worst case scenario for drafting CMC in round 3 or 4 is getting swapped to a guy like Alvin Kamara, Rachaad White, or you set your ranks and you get a guy like Rhamondre or Jerome Ford if you want to inch those guys up your personal ranks. The point is, it's well worth taking the risk on CMC right now because you can essentially build teams where CMC is your 4th guy, your 2nd running back, and you still could potentially get access to that insane ceiling that we know CMC has. I should also mention, if we're going to get really in the weeds with the swap dynamics, if there are multiple swaps to be made, let's say someone else had a player who was questionable and got ruled out, the swaps will be made in reverse draft order. So just know you won't always be guaranteed the top player or the top player by your ranks, but most of the time you will be, because this doesn't happen a ton, and normally the ranks will be different, the players that you want or your opponent wants, etc. So the other note here is swap eligible players who become inactive. This can include if they're doubtful, if they're out, if they're traded, if they're retired, if they're suspended, all of these will qualify. One other thing to note is if a player already had this designation prior to being selected, they're not swap eligible. So if it's a doubtful tag, you're not getting the swap. It's only for those questionable tags. So make sure you are paying attention to that. And then one final note on this, the swap is all out automatic. Obviously, if you want to reset your ranks, you can, but the actual placement of the swap is all going to be handled automatically by Underdog, and it occurs when the next game begins after the player has been marked inactive. So no need to panic if you don't see it right away. All right. Before we hop in a few drafts here, I do want to shout out the winner of the Deposit Kingdom Battle Royale League in week 1. We mentioned it last week. Every single week this year, we are going to have our own Deposit Kingdom branded tournament in the Underdog lobby. It's going to post Fridays at 3 p.m. Eastern. So if you're watching this right now, this week's contest should already be live in the lobby, but I do want to take a look at last week's winner. Shout out to user ERARFA, E-R-A-R-F-A, took down first place with 121.38 points. They had the best plays lineup. Josh Allen at quarterback, Alvin Kamara and Joe Mixon at running back, Nico Collins and Mike Evans at wide receiver, and Kyle Pitts at tight end. None of these plays were going undrafted. There's basically no correlation in this lineup as well, other than just Joe Mixon and Nico, both from the Texans. But this is a good note for smaller tournaments. You know, when we're talking about these scroll down plays, it's because there's 50, 60,000 entries in a Battle Royale contest. In our Deposit Kingdom contest, there's only going to be 1,000, maybe 1,500 if we make it bigger. But I think this is a good way to know you don't have to get as weird. You don't have to scroll down as much in these smaller tournaments. So go check out, get your 3 entries into the Deposit Kingdom contest here for week 2. And then we'll have 2 spots that we review the winning lineups. I do a portfolio review show on my live stream channel every Monday at 10 a.m. It's a way for me to look back on all of my DFS lineups. That includes my DraftKings contest, all of my Battle Royale drafts, my pick'ems, my guillotine leagues. It's an hour-and-a-half show where we just go through everything, talk it out, and I will, of course, always review those Deposit Kingdom weekly winning lineups. So make sure you guys are tapped in over there. All right, I think it's time to hop in some drafts and try out some of these ideas. All right, time to hop in some Underdog drafts and try out some of these ideas. So the first idea I want to try out today in a draft here is called the Konami Stack. And this is in opposition to what we kind of talked about in the 5 commandments last week. And one of the things I said is you got to know the rules before you break the rules. And last week we saw something happen where all of the rushing quarterbacks, or a majority of them, had monster games, and they didn't involve a stacking partner. So we had Josh Allen go off. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. We had Jayden Daniels go off. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. And we had Anthony Richardson also have a massive rushing game. And so there's a dynamic where people kind of overreact to exactly what happened the previous week. And there's different ways that these rushing quarterbacks can get there. They can get there in games where they dominate the rushing production. That's exactly what Jayden Daniels did last week. But for this draft, I want to posit what happens if instead of one of those rushing touchdowns, it's a long pass to one of their pass catchers. What if stacking up their wide receiver one is actually the optimal way to play that slate? It doesn't mean you don't get their rushing production. You still get that. But if some of the production swings over through the pass more than it was in previous weeks, I think that could be an edge to exploit. So the two I want to look at, we can try either one, whichever one breaks nicely in a draft, would be Anthony Richardson with Michael Pittman Jr., who was one of our gems earlier, or we could do Jayden Daniels with Terry McLaurin. And the really nice thing about this is both Pittman Jr. and McLaurin are not getting drafted in 100% of these drafts. In fact, they're rarely getting drafted based on their ADP. I can show you here as I hop in a Battle Royale draft. Terry McLaurin's ADP 35.5, which means he's not regularly getting drafted. Michael Pittman is behind him at 35.6. And then our two quarterback targets, they're the QB3 and QB4. They're going to be rostered a lot, but they're not going to be paired with their top wide receivers that often. You can tell by these ADPs of both the quarterbacks and the wide receivers that they're primarily just being taken naked, which I get, I understand. It's viable, but it's happening because that's just what happened last week. And as we talked about in the gems, the market share for Michael Pittman there was awesome. In the role, wasn't bad for McLaurin either. And I think anytime you can get number one wide receiver stacked up with quarterbacks at a discount, it's definitely something I want to do. So we'll see if we can get a couple more people to hop in this Battle Royale Week 2 draft. This week, we got 67,992 entrants in this contest. You can check out the payout structure here, 30,000 to first, 15,000 to second, 7,500 to third, 6,000 to fourth. This is one of the bigger contests in the lobby as far as the first place prize. I really like a lot of the other contests in the lobby that are smaller. There's single entry contests, there's 5 max, there's some nice mid stakes contests as well. So for the purposes of these hidden gems, they are engineered to really help you take down these really, really big contests. But I will in future videos kind of talk maybe some alternating strategy for the 6-person smaller contest as well as the 12-person drafts. Right now in the lobby, there is the Deposit Kingdom, the Dog Bowl qualifier. That's a 12-person draft, and that is going to be a live event in Miami. And one of these weeks, we will talk about strategy for that as well. All right, so we are going to hop in and get underway in this draft. We got the 5-hole. It is a badge-filled morning here. But unlike season-long drafts where it's like you see a bunch of badges and it can be rough. In these battle royales, because only 36 players are taken, it never feels like you're in too much of a pinch here. So looking at our quarterback ADPs, Anthony Richardson 23, Jayden Daniels 24. We should be able to get one of those guys with our 4th round pick. So basically, we know our 4th round pick is going to be Anthony Richardson or Jayden Daniels, and we know our 6th round pick is going to be Michael Pittman Jr. or Terry McLaurin. So now we already know that we're just drafting our first, our second, 3rd, and 5th picks. And then we also know we're going to be looking for a tight end because the tight end's not going to be a part of our stack. We'll be looking for one other wide receiver. And I think ideally, like I mentioned earlier in this video, 2 running backs on this slate. All right, we already get something really weird happening in this draft with Lamar Jackson going 101. I think Lamar Jackson is fine this week. I think when you factor in price, I do prefer Anthony Richardson and Jayden Daniels. But if you're trying to get, the problem with doing this Lamar Jackson pick here is like, what are you gaining? So Lamar Jackson has an ADP of 11. So you can often get Lamar Jackson at the 2-3 turn. So instead of having Cooper Kupp in Lamar Jackson, this drafter is going to have Lamar Jackson and Garrett Wilson or whatever. So it's like, what are you really accomplishing there? All right, we're on the clock at 5. Breece Hall slipped, so we'll grab Breece Hall. We know we're gonna need some running backs in addition to this Konami stack that we're gonna try to execute. Kyron Williams goes, and we'll just scoop the 2 slight ADP fallers here. We'll grab Justin Jefferson in this game against Minnesota or against San Francisco. So now we get Breece Hall at pick 5. We get Justin Jefferson at pick 8. And again, one of the things I'm always thinking about, okay, so I know I'm going to do this Konami code stack. I know the quarterback element of it's not going to be unique. I do know that that last stacking piece is going to be unique. So I know at least my 6th round pick is kind of a low owned scroll the F down guy, but I still probably want to sprinkle in one other play here that I think is maybe being overlooked by the field. So that would likely be our 5th pick or our 6th pick. Maybe I'll just lock up our pass catcher in the 5th round. Yeah, so this drafter is doing some weird stuff here. Lamar Jackson, Chris Godwin, Jayden Reed. Again, like nothing egregious, as far as like, oh, throw this draft out or whatever. They're not taking Carson Steele in the 1st round, but definitely scrolling the F down here. Lamar Jackson at 1, Chris Godwin at 12, Reed at 13. So we'll see. I think what I'll do is if Richardson or Daniels goes, I'll take one of the other one at 17 just to make sure I lock one up. If not, I know that the turn drafter can only take one. So then I'd grab a player and then take whichever of Daniels or Richardson comes back. I think this is probably the spot I grab a tight end if they don't go quarterback here. So we have options with Laporta, Kelsey. He does go Richardson. So you know what? I just want to lock up Jayden Daniels. It would be such a bummer if I didn't get Jayden Daniels for this experiment. And we know one of these tight ends is going to be here as well. 7's going to do the Mahomes-Kelsey stack there, which is obviously solid. Let's do Laporta here. We'll do Laporta. He's the I think should be the top ranked tight end. I do think McBride is set up really well this week, but we will grab Laporta. So now on this team, we have Jayden Daniels, we have Breece Hall, we have Justin Jefferson, and we have Sam Laporta. We know that we are doing one of we're going to do McLaurin in this one. That leaves us with one spot. It could be a 3rd wide receiver. It could be a 2nd running back. I mentioned it in the video. Like right now, I'm going to continue to collect Christian McCaffrey. We talked about the swap dynamics. I'll set my ranks. I will, if I don't get Christian McCaffrey because he's inactive, I know. And when this draft is over, if I get Christian McCaffrey, I'll show you guys again who some of the swap options would be, because you can just look and see who are the available running backs who weren't taken. Those are going to be the players that are available to swap from Christian McCaffrey to. I often get questions about what these numbers are on my screen. I'm using the Draft Caddy. If you watch me draft best ball teams this year, you saw me have the week 17 correlations, the week 16 matchups, etc. on there. Right now I can see the spread. So I can see Arizona is -1, or say George Kittle and the Niners are -5 versus Minnesota, and that game totals 46.5. Kind of just a nice thing to have up here as you're making decisions. So yeah, Christian McCaffrey comes all the way back to me at right at his ADP. I want to continue to click this this week, and I'll again kind of reiterate why. We talked about that in the kind of evergreen strategy discussion as it pertains to swaps. And then I have a hard time imagining that this drafter is going to snipe me on Terry McLaurin. You see all of these other wide receivers ahead of him in ADP. One other nice thing about the Draft Caddy, and again, you guys can get this overlay tool at thedraftcaddy.com, is it reminds you of the players that you have stacked. So you can see Terry McLaurin's highlighted here for me. I, of course, put him in the queue, but a nice little thing if you're trying to remember some of those correlations. So this team will break exactly how I kind of hoped here. We're going to take Terry McLaurin, and then it will be done, and we'll keep an eye on the running back situation here. All right, so we take Terry McLaurin. This team is done. We accomplished our mission, which was a Konami code stack with Jayden Daniels and Terry McLaurin. You can see ADP of 35.5 here from McLaurin, means he's not being regularly drafted. We get an elite tight end with Sam Laporta, another elite wide receiver in Justin Jefferson, an elite bell cow in Breece Hall. And then normally I would have used my scroll down running back pick here. I would have got one of the guys we talked about, a Rhamondre Stevenson, a Jerome Ford. But because Christian McCaffrey is such a unique piece on this slate this week, I'm going to just continue to click him at a pretty high frequency around this pick. If he plays, holy cow, I could have 2 top 5 bell cow backs in Breece Hall and Christian McCaffrey. If he's scratched, you can see here, these are some of the options I could swap to. J.K. Dobbins, Josh Jacobs, Alvin Kamara, Rhamondre Stevenson, Rashad White, David Montgomery, Brian Robinson, Jerome Ford, who's one of our guys, Travis Etienne, Aaron Jones. So the opportunity cost is so low. I'm happy with any of these guys. A lot of these guys project well. I can set my ranks. And so I'm going to continue to grab McCaffrey personally because I am not afraid of some of those kind of swap decisions. All right, we're going to hop in another draft here and try out an idea that we've basically already floated in the Hidden Gems. And this is a Cleveland Jacksonville Gem Mini. So on this team, we are going to select Evan Engram and Jerome Ford. Those were 2 of our gems. And there's a couple nice things about pairing these guys together. One, they're just 2 low-owned guys who aren't getting drafted in the majority of contests. And then we're getting just a slight benefit of them playing in the same game environment. When we made our best ball commandments, our battle royale commandments, our top 5 in last week's video. By the way, if you guys missed last week's video, I have those timestamped. You can skip past the week 1 plays and jump right through those 5 commandments. It's a really good primer for getting you basically just caught up to speed on how to optimally attack these battle royale drafts. But one of the things I said is people force the mini correlations too much, but where they're forcing them is in with the players who are getting drafted in every contest a ton. So like an example would be, Kyron Williams and Trey McBride will probably be used way too much together because it's easy to get both of them. They play in the same game. Those are the ones I think are overused. I promise what won't be overused are mini correlations for 2 players who aren't regularly getting drafted. So Evan Engram, 35.1 ADP now, Jerome Ford, 35.7, rarely getting drafted. So we get the double boost of, hey, we liked these plays in the vacuum, and now they actually just play against each other. So we can play for a scenario of, hey, Jerome Ford continues to hog the usage, and we get an Evan Engram game for Jacksonville. And that little duo there kind of supercharges a unique team. So we will get underway with this draft. We got the 101 here. So we'll take Cooper Kupp. And then the other thing to kind of think through in this spot is who we want to be our quarterback. I don't love necessarily doing Trevor Lawrence with Evan Engram. I feel like Lawrence, Engram, Ford is maybe just a little too galaxy brain. I don't love doing Matthew Stafford with Cooper Kupp. So I think one thing we might be looking at is a quarterback wide receiver stack with our, 2nd, 3rd, or 4th pick. So we'll keep an eye out for that. But again, this is one of the kind of benefits of kind of pre-planning some of your drafts, or just knowing, hey, in this draft, I want to do Engram Ford, or in this draft, I want to do Terry McLaurin with Jayden Daniels. It forces you to get into different pockets of the draft board that you might not naturally be funneled to. And there's a lot of value to that because a lot of people will get funneled to the same picks and the same combination of picks because of ADP. So I can give you an example here. So I just took Cooper Kupp at 1-1. My next 2 picks are at 12 and 13. So we can go look at ADP here. We can see Jonathan Taylor, Garrett Wilson, Lamar Jackson, Patrick Mahomes. My guess is that Cooper Kupp will be paired with 2 of Lamar, JT, Garrett Wilson, Mahomes, Derrick Henry a ton of the time because people go through these drafts in robot mode. They're on autopilot. They look at the ADP, they say I'm up, and these are one of the best 4 players. We can go and see who's available when we pick. So just not taking one of those 4 guys who are usually paired with the 101, and you can do this exercise for every draft slot, right? Well, let's look at the 5-6. Those 2 players, Kyron and Evans, those guys are going to be paired a ton. So if you're able to just get a little weird, you don't have to get super weird, but just pulling guys up who aren't correlated by ADP, I think that's a really smart thing you can do to kind of differentiate your teams early. And look at this, lo and behold, who's available at 12-13? the 4 names we just said: Lamar Jackson, Jonathan Taylor, Garrett Wilson, Patrick Mahomes. So I know I'm not taking a tight end here. And this is the spot where I don't mind being a little weird. This feels like a spot where we're going to have to take one. We could do a quarterback here. This is what we'll do. We could do like a Lamar Jackson with Zay Flowers, potentially, to lock up that stack. So we're going to take Lamar Jackson, who does often go in this range, but we're going to go ahead and dance around and grab Zay Flowers. So this is where we're going to kind of reach here. We're going to lock up the stack. We know we're not doing Mark Andrews or Isaiah Likely because we're going to do Evan Engram on this lineup. And again, that's another thing to think through. The majority of Lamar teams this week are going to have Likely or Andrews. Sure, Zay Flowers ADP is right in between these guys as well, but I think most people want to gravitate to stacking Lamar with one of those tight ends. So we'll see if this is a unique angle or not. We're going to take one more running back here because we know we're going with Evan Engram and Jerome Ford. So our tight end is good. We got our main stack. We got Cooper Kupp, and then it'll be just getting one more running back play. And who knows? Maybe we just keep rolling with the Christian McCaffrey selections. But I do really recommend this exercise of putting a few guys in your queue ahead of time, forcing a reach in the 3rd round, something that feels uncomfortable. Like, yeah, do I think Garrett Wilson projects better than Zay Flowers? Of course. But to what kind of ownership do I want to run into of how many Cooper Kupp, Lamar Jackson, Garrett Wilson teams are there going to be? There's going to be a lot. So I immediately want to kind of deviate from that path that is only correlated because of ADP. It's not correlated because the players are in the same game. If you're doing, Mike Evans and Amon-Ra St. Brown and then one of the quarterbacks, like, that's correlation within the game. But the correlation just because of ADP, that's the correlation that we want to stick away from or stray away from. I think we're just going to keep hammering this Christian McCaffrey thing here. So we know we're going to take Jerome Ford with our last pick. You know what we should actually do? We should take Jerome Ford and Evan Engram and then just see if the room is going to give us Christian McCaffrey. I really want to see if people are just letting him go undrafted. So let's lock up our Evan Engram. Let's lock up our Jerome Ford. And we'll put Christian McCaffrey in the queue, who we will continue to take with these last picks. And we'll see. In the last draft, we took him at ADP around 29. And now I'm just more curious. Are just people not drafting him now? I do think that's a mistake. Once we get to this territory with the swap dynamics, I understand if you don't want to take CMC over Gibbs, over Pacheco, these guys who could finish as top 5 backs. But once we get down into this range, J.K. Dobbins, Josh Jacobs without Jordan Love, Alvin Kamara, Rhamondre, I just don't see any reason not to take the plunge on Christian McCaffrey. Because again, what's the worst case? The true worst case, we already outlined it, right? Him and Jordan Mason both suit up, split backfield, they cannibalize each other. But there's also scenarios where Christian McCaffrey's ruled out, no problem, I got a free look, and I swap to someone else. Or Christian McCaffrey plays, and they can't help but give him 15 plus high-value touches. They use him at the goal line. And now all of a sudden, you got a 25-point back with your 6th pick. And now I am going to get Christian McCaffrey here with my last pick. We will continue to select Christian McCaffrey. We're going to have a ton of him. And again, my normal thing I would do here, I would scroll down to one of these backs, an Alvin Kamara. So in this draft, when I set my ranks, I can either get Jordan Mason if I wanted to. In this draft, he slipped way past ADP. If Christian McCaffrey plays, I could set it up to get Kamara, who has an insane workload. This is just a spot I think you need to be exploiting this week. All right, let's do one more draft here with a final idea. This one is a fun one. When I was looking at undervalued players this week, obviously 5 of them ended up in the gems. There were 5 who didn't. One I just mentioned. And the theme of this one we're calling the Dusty Vet Trio. So Alvin Kamara, Davante Adams, and Amari Cooper are all very cheap this week. When you look at the projections, they project better than their ADP. And I also just think these three are never going to be paired with each other. And we are going to put them all on one team with our last three picks. Kamara has an ADP now of 33.6, Davante 34.5, and Amari 35.5. Now, the other fun thing about thinking through this and saying, all right, I'm guessing there are going to be basically no teams that have this trio. I also know I don't really want to use Minshew, and I certainly don't want to use Deshaun Watson as my quarterback. These games have low game totals. We're essentially playing this as an alpha game from Adams, an alpha game from Cooper. They consolidate all the production. So what that means is I need to be looking for another stack. That's either going to be a quarterback with a third wide receiver or a quarterback with a tight end. So that's the other thing to think through here. I think ideally I would get a running back with this fifth pick. Maybe we grab our quarterback with the second round, and then we get the tight end potentially with the third pick. But we will want to leave ourselves outs here. Lamar is probably a good quarterback to take on this team because it gives us outs to both Likely and Andrews. And then we already know our final three picks are going to be pretty unique. Kamara is getting drafted in a decent amount of these. I can look at my stuff here. So Kamara I have getting drafted in around like 30% of these. So we will grab Kyron because we know that on this team, our two wide receivers is going to be Adams and Cooper. Our second wide receiver is going to be Kamara. And then we just want to set up a quarterback tight end stack. So yeah, let's do Lamar here. I like doing Andrews. He was my honorable mention in the video when I talked about Evan Engram. He's the other guy when we look at these top tight ends, right? Laporta, Kelsey's 2, McBride's 3, Kittle's 4, Likely's 5. Andrews did move up a smidge into tight end 6, so he is more regularly getting drafted compared to Evan Engram, who's tight end 8. But because I know of this Kamara, Adams, Amari trio, this team's already going to be mega unique. So I don't care about the fact that Mark Andrews is getting drafted a ton. And I mentioned this last week. One of the fun things about when you kind of pre-plan some of these teams and you're not just going on ADP autopilot, you then can literally go on autopilot. Now, sure, this could backfire on me if someone goes rogue and takes a pick that I wasn't expecting. But for the most part, I know people are not going to be taking, look where I pick. I pick next at 17. I don't think anyone's taking Mark Andrews who has an ADP of 32 at 17. I don't think my next pick at 20, anyone's taking Alvin Kamara. So I could literally push the plane. That's what we call turning autopilot off, by the way, if you guys aren't familiar with that language there. And then I could just move on to the next draft. And it allows me to get in a lot of drafts while still building out the teams that I want. And this is kind of an extreme version of it. Normally, the last two picks are a little bit easier. It's rare that I can put, 4 picks in autopilot like I can here. So we'll see Deebo Samuel goes. I take Mark Andrews, Snap picks it for me, and I could already be off doing another draft. But I've been kind of hammering this point home, but I do really think, sometimes I like just ripping the draft. You grab your phone, you do a team. But I also like looking at the undervalued plays. Who are the gems that we outlined here? How do I make sure I get exposure to them? And I swear, the anchoring bias to ADP, even when I want to scroll down and select Jerome Ford, I want to scroll down and select Michael Pittman. It is so hard when you're in that room and you're looking at ADP and you're like, oh no, this guy fell 2 picks past ADP. Zay Flowers is here. Brandon Ayuk is here. And it's like, no. You have to trust that they do not project much differently than those guys who are going undrafted. And I think the best way to kind of force you out of that autopilot, so to speak, is to either pre-plan it with your queue like I'm doing here, or you just reach. Just take the guy you are planning to take in the 6th round, take him in the 3rd. You'll naturally get on different teams. And as we've already established, outside of the top 10 picks this week, I think like after Deebo to me is like a line. After he's off the board, these picks just don't project that much differently. There's 5 to 6 really good tight ends on the slate. All of them have similar ceilings. All of these quarterbacks, Richardson, Daniels, Mahomes, all go in a
a cluster. And once you get down to the Garrett Wilson, yada, yada, the Derrick Henry, the Kamara, etc., all of these guys project similarly. So your goal should be to build out the exposures, build out the correlations that you want access to. And don't care about the ADP, care about the projection. And the projections say that these guys don't project much differently. So now we just got to make sure that no one goes rogue and snipes us on Adams and Amari here with these final 2 picks, but I don't really think that's going to happen. Oh, the other nice thing here, again, this is just a bonus. I wasn't even thinking it through. Davante Adams is the bring back in this Lamar Andrews. And again, I'm never going out of my way to force that. That's literally just a happy accident between how I wanted to set this up. But I don't mind it in some of these scenarios, especially for a low total game where I'm basically saying this game scores way more points than I envisioned. And how does that happen? Well, Lamar and Andrews are cooking, and then Adams is cooking on the bring back here. So didn't even have to click any of these myself because I just set it up in the queue. Now this team is done. We got Lamar Jackson to Andrews. We got Kyron and Kamara, Adams, and Amari Cooper. So those are our drafts. Always like having some of these ideas, and you can come up with some of your own. You can use my hidden gems, write them down. Say I want to have 5 Lamar and Andrews teams. Say I want to have, 5 Evan Engram, Jerome Ford teams, and then go out and build those teams. And then you can mix and match some of your other preferences around them. So final reminder here that by the time this video posts, the Deposit Kingdom Weekly League for week 2 will be in the lobby. If you want to find it, you're just going to go to the NFL tab and you're going to scroll all the way over. And I'm guessing it'll be somewhere around here. Look for that Deposit Kingdom logo and you guys can hop in and compete with everyone else in the Deposit Kingdom.
If you guys want my last minute thoughts on the slate each week, I do a DFS cram for YouTube members on the Pete Overzet live stream channel every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m. Eastern. It's a very helpful show if you're just trying to get caught up, get crammed for the slate. We go through both the Underdog and DraftKings plays, overnight news, my favorite tournament clicks, because a lot of times that stuff can change between when we record this and what happens overnight on Sunday. And then we're live through inactive news at 11:30 a.m. Eastern. And of course, we wrap up with a couple of drafts. We build some pick'ems. The link is down below. You just become a YouTube member on that Pete Overzet YouTube channel and you join the Hand Builders and Opto Bro tiers for access. You also get access to the DFS After Dark shows. That's an interview series that I do over there. This week, I'm joined by Gumby, who's been building sims for these Battle Royale contests. We'll see what kind of alpha he can leak for us there. All right, guys, good luck in week 2. I'm Pete Overzet. Let me know in the comments who are your hidden gems this week, and we'll see you guys at the top of the leaderboard.